So in this video we'll be looking at why do you become a different person under pressure, or why do you appear to become a different person under pressure. Something I've noticed is people begin to behave differently under pressure. So this is something we perhaps all have noticed. Why is this? What changes first? Is it the internal situation, or is it the external situation? Of course, we'll be forced to conclude that it's actually the external situation that changes first. So the natural question is, if the external situation changes, do we need to change the internal situation? So notice the symptoms when pressure or stress actually attaches itself to you, or you to it. There's a changing in breathing. Breathing becomes less deep, more shallow, and in fact more rapid. So there's an immediate corresponding effect on the nervous system. So, for example, in fight or flight, there's a certain select number of pathways which get activated. So instead of actually responding to the situation in a holistic way, you're responding according to limited pathways, which of course are necessary for survival, but in fact are limited and less holistic. So an example of this is vision becomes constricted. Instead of peripherally seeing and taking in everything, one is forced to narrow their attention, narrow the visual field, and correspondingly the world actually seems to get smaller as a result. Movement becomes more gross. So, for example, there's less fine motor skills and more gross motor activity, so that instead of remaining in control, being able to use those subtle movements which we practice in martial arts. So, for example, when we do a punch, there's a subtle adjustment of the posture rather than a sudden explosive and dissipating force. There's a containment in there. In addition to this, emotion becomes an outburst rather than a holistic flow. Let's say we get angry. Instead of actually the anger flowing and becoming circulating the system. In fact, what we see in emergency situations is, or when people react to pressure, we see the emotions become an outburst rather than an oscillation of back and forth, a spread. They become concentrated. So, what if the technique, the explosiveness, the strength, the speed and the reactivity, what if that isn't the first port of call? What if that isn't the most vital aspect of the technique? and organisation of the system is. So the body organises energy through how it's expressed. So let's say I'm expressing something scattered, violently, and with aggression. The mind naturally follows. So the point I'm trying to make is that the mind naturally follows not only the breath, but actually the body and the posture, the emotions, and all of the outputs and modes of operating that we use. So it's not necessarily what you do, it's how you organize it. So pressure isn't simply stress. We don't just experience pressure as stress. Perhaps it is information. This is a threat. How to adjust accordingly. Do I attack straight away? Do I step back? Do I lower? Do I ground myself to be able to actually interact more successfully with that threat? It's a difference. It's a sudden noise, a sudden movement in the environment. It does not mean we need to be carried away by reactions. The reaction can happen as part of a bigger movement of organization. So we can receive this stimulus, this outside external stimulus, to provoke a better response, a more integrated response, a better organized response. So it isn't about suppressing emotions or suppressing our reactions to the external environment. Instead, it is more about integrating these and containing them appropriately, rather than containing them within a select few fight or flight mechanisms or survival instincts. So don't resist, organize. Don't collapse, distribute appropriately and as necessary. So for instance, you might initially be caught up in the apprehension of the moment, but gradually, after this has sunk in and settled, it is possible to actually integrate the response so that it's more distributed, which is an aspect of containment. Let's say you have an argument or an interview. The first response, the first reaction is, oh my God, I might not get the interview. I might fall out with a friend. I might get laughed at, I might get, insecurity creeps in. What happens to the body in these instances? So have a think about that. Do you become more prepared, expansive, or do you shrink and become less than you are capable of being? Now, neither of those is inevitable. Your response dictates what becomes the inevitable outcome of your reaction. So the total response creates an inevitable outcome, whereas the reaction creates an inevitable limited reaction or outcome. So the response is more than the reaction. So what have we actually seen from this? We've seen the response need not be actually contained within the limited pathway of the reaction. The reaction, let's take the example of kicking a ball. If we kick the ball, we don't have to kick it without intent, without fine motor skill, without deliberate practice, without breath control. All of this creates a more steady arrangement of the technique. And this is the same whether it's breathing, whether it's striking in martial arts, whether it's punching, whether it's kicking, whether it's postural, how you bear the posture, how you assert yourself in conversation, or just sitting, meditating. So there's a universal kind of application here. We can see that all of these things, working through the breath, through the posture, alignment, actually creates a chemical basis for experience, and alters the chemistry, alters the physiology, alters the mind, because the mind isn't just the brain. The brain contains theories, it contains perception, but these are all influenced by the senses, how we see things. Is our vision constricted? Are our emotions overwhelming? Are we creating for them a suitable, necessary and appropriate response so that they're not contained and constricted within tension? Are we extending enough energy into the situation? Are we resolving the tension through action, through the breath, and through expression? So it's how one expresses the tension that leads to the resolution of the tension becoming an energy or a pressure. It's a tremendous potential. So the anger, the tension, isn't the end, inevitable consequence of the beginning phase of the trigger. You are able to shape this largely, and it's a tremendous potential, provided it is directed intelligently and holistically, and not, you can say, denatured into a limited response. It becomes its full expression instead. So we've observed that something such as anger can become a tremendous potential, but if it stays at its base level, it won't grow or expand into any greater possibility. So is it possible to work with emotion, work with the body, to influence the mind? Absolutely. Because the posture, the breathing, this all affects the heart rate, the internal equilibrium, which actually has an effect on the mind. When the mind is outwardly reactive rather than internally observant, then there is an undue influence of the external on the brain, and then correspondingly on the body. So instead, if we work by perceiving the posture correctly and grounding ourselves through martial arts, through any kind of activity really, this can cause the brain to become more settled and more under your command or your control or influence. This obviously is not just exclusive to martial arts. This can be applied to anything, from sitting down, from working, from interacting with others, to martial arts. So it's not that you destroy or become passive in your reactivity. It's that you bring it to a new level by combining it and integrating it effectively, rather than treating it as something undesirable or unwanted. You include it within a greater scope of activity. So, in terms of martial arts, how can this help one's practice? Well, because Martial arts is a lot to do with self-discipline. It's not about technique for the sake of technique. It's a system of self-regulation, which does not mean just being calm and passive. It means channeling effectively into action. So the form, you channel this energy through the form. You inject everything into it. You don't just make it a technical exercise of right and wrong, and become unduly impressed by the techniques of others, or even take technical criticisms to heart. It's a way of practicing self-regulation, not of perfecting the external expression of the form.